Hello, wonderful viewers. Thanks for joining me today. Make yourself comfortable, perhaps with your favorite beverage, and let's dive into today's exciting story. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing videos. Bubby. I didn't suspect. Quite the opposite. I knew that our love life had stagnated down to 3 times a weekend, like clockwork, and needed to be spiced up, but I swear my only thought was to get Glenda excited. I just didn't know. My brother Doug had given me a doorbell camera, but Glenda didn't like the look of it. She was proud of our Victorian home and felt that the camera would be anachronistic. I like our 1880s look. She gave me a pout. Let's not ruin it, honey. So, it sat on my dresser, waiting for me to find a way to explain it to Doug without it sounding like a rejection. Now, it figured into my plan to spice up our lives. That night, I moved the doorbell camera from the dresser to the bookshelf opposite my bed. "What's that doing there?" Glenda asked. It was in my way on the dresser, so I put it there until I can figure out what to do with it without offending my brother. He was being thoughtful when he gave us that, and I want to ensure he's not hurt when he finds out we've rejected his gift. I responded. It seemed to satisfy her. The next day, I bought an identical camera. I opened it up and modified it, silencing its alarm bells and speakers, disconnecting the LED lights, and then wired it with a plug-in power cable. Later I switched the cameras and fed the power cord through the back of the bookshelf. I now have a motion-activated camera in my bedroom. I hooked it up to the Wi-Fi, so I could access it through the internet. It would send me the same alerts that it would have done at the front door, but the internal speaker was disabled, so it would make no sounds nor play any messages, should I not pick up the alert. The camera's images would be saved to my cloud. So now, maybe I would have some sexy videos that could excite us when we played them back. Yeah, in hindsight, really a stupid plan. It all seemed like a good idea, until it wasn't. And it wasn't right away. It had taken a week for me to modify the camera, and to replace it in the bedroom, with the power hooked up without raising Glenda's suspicions. So, it was Monday before it went into action, and I was scheduled to be out of town until Thursday. I giggled, thinking I might catch Glenda, relieving the pressure with her toys. Glenda's mundane movements in the bedroom set off alert after alert, so I soon stopped paying attention to each of them during that first day, and after dinner drinks had me flop on the bed and fall right to sleep. It wasn't until Wednesday night that I finally had time to review the videos in the cloud. I skipped over the videos from Monday morning until 10 a.m. when I left for the airport. Most of the day was my wife moving in and out of the bedroom, but at 2 o'clock a man appeared. I didn't know him, but my wife was caressing his arms and looking at him with a longing I didn't recognize. "So, your husband's out of town until when?" the man asked as he ran a hand over Glenda's B-cup melons, giving them a squeeze. "Thursday," Glenda licked her lips. "Next week it's back to the normal schedule. But today, there's no hurry for you to leave. You can even stay overnight." She pulled his head down and planted a kiss on his lips. "Now, get these off," she commanded. I watched in horror as my missionary-only wife, with her U's and not in my mouth, went full 6 and 9 with a stranger. I triggered the fast-forward function. I realized I had been staring, unseeing at the screen. I was barely aware that they had sex in numerous positions during the day, and in all her orifices. They'd left the room several times, to eat and shower, I suppose. I hadn't been listening at all. With everything I saw so far, I rushed to the toilet to vomit. I stopped the video and went out to buy a bottle of anything. It ended up being bourbon, but only because it was closest to the door of the liquor store. It was a quarter gone by the time I returned to my room. The message light on the room telephone was blinking. I picked up my cell that I'd left charging on the desk and saw that Glenda had called several times. I picked up the message on the hotel phone and yep, it was Glenda. She wanted to make sure of my flight time tomorrow. She was irritated that I wasn't answering my cell. Gee, I wondered why. The messages on my cell were increasingly irritated at her failure to reach me. I booted up the laptop and loaded the videos from the time of her first call. Another surprise. Different guy. But the good news was my brother wouldn't feel any rejection that I hadn't used his present. It was him, in bed with Glenda in his birthday suit. The first part of the video recorded them stumbling into the room, in each other's arms, then falling onto the bed. Oh, yes, and they were both in their birthday suits. I fast-forwarded through to the actual act. Not missionary though. Seemed she reserved missionary just for me. Glenda reached for the phone. "Now hush, Doug. Let me make sure Bobby's plans haven't changed." She dialed the phone with one hand, and then held the remote phone to her ear. The other hand was absently playing with Doug's stick. They just finished, but little Dougie was showing interest already. Darn, it's going to his voicemail. She looked irritated as she left her first message. Doug was definitely showing interest now, but Glenda held him back when he reached for her. "No, he's going to call back and I don't want to be interrupted." I watched as Doug pressed her for another go, while she held him off as she left her multiple messages, getting more and more frustrated with me after each failure to connect. She finally tried the hotel phone. I'd fast-forwarded through most of the scene, so I didn't get to hear any of Doug's obvious pleading between phone calls. Finally, little Dougie had lost interest, and my brother was now just sitting back against the headboard, looking irritated. I was shocked when he pointed directly at the camera. I stopped the playback and reversed it to just before he pointed. "Hey," he said, "what's my present doing on your bookshelf?" "Yeah, thanks for that." Glenda paused her latest styling attempt and sneered at Doug. "Stupidest present ever. Do you really want Bobby to have a record of people coming and going from this house? Huh?" Doug looked sheepish as the connotations occurred finally to him. "God, no." "Well, it stays there until he figures out how not to insult you while rejecting your gift." She resumed dialing. "Stupid, ducking idiot," she said. Took me a minute to realize she meant Doug and not me. I triggered the fast-forwarding again. The fast-forwarding stopped itself, and I realized I was now watching live-action video. Glenda looked very frustrated, especially when her hand action was failing to resurrect little Dougie. She apparently gave up waiting for me, and started using her mouth to get Doug back in the mood. Gee, I couldn't remember the last time those lips had touched little Bobby. Glenda had always greeted any plea for a little head. That's just gross. So, now I watched with interest as she not only went down on Doug's stick, but tried to swallow it whole, still covered with the evidence of their last duck. It took a while, but she finally resurrected the dead stick and got down to the next order of business. So, I picked up the phone and called home. I mean, what else would you do? The look of frustration and aggravation on both their faces almost seemed worth it. Glenda swore, then swore again before getting off my brother, instead of getting him off to answer the phone. She shushed Doug before answering. "Oh, Bobby," butter would have melted in her mouth. "I was so worried when I couldn't reach you. Where were you?" "Oh, I'm sorry. My phone died and I'd left the charger in the room. We worked right through today and finished early. I'm on my way to the airport to see about getting a flight home. I could be there in an hour if I hurry. I'll see you later." I rang off. Glenda swore even more. "You've got to get the duck out of here," she told my brother. He tried to grab her, saying that they had time for a quick one. "Are you nuts?" She jumped out of bed. "Your brother thinks he could be here in an hour. It's only a half-hour flight. I've got to clean the sheets and the everything." "Oh, shy," she finished as she started pulling off the bedding with Doug still on it. My former brother started getting dressed, with his stick bouncing in front of him. I hope he caught it in the zipper. I stopped the live feed. Didn't care, I thought. Bourbon. This called for more bourbon. I had no intention of trying to get home. If she called, I'll tell her that no flights were available and that I just returned to the hotel. Ducker, everyone else had. I wasn't going to say anything until after I saw the lawyer. I went back over the previous videos. The mystery man from Monday tried to get Glenda to invite him back on Tuesday and Wednesday, but she was adamant that this was a one-shot. New week, back to the normal schedule. Normal schedule. Apparently, this wasn't a one-off. This was her normal afternoons, extended now into the evenings. On the Tuesday videos, I expected Doug, since the mystery man was denied. But it wasn't my brother. It was two brothers, the sons of our neighbors. They were college kids who seemed willing to skip classes for the day. Glenda offered them all her holes, all the positions they wanted. Then they lounged in my bed while she went and prepared lunch, and later at dinner, which they consumed still in my bed. She wouldn't even let me eat a candy bar in bed. Perversely, this seemed to bother me more than all the sex. God, was I kitty-whipped and clueless. I was finishing the bourbon as the brothers DP'd my wife. The idea had made me throw up my food earlier, but I really wanted to hang on to the bourbon in my stomach. I couldn't believe it. Who was this woman? I passed out from the bourbon and frankly from boredom. I just wasn't that interested in watching a hoe get plowed. Glenda called me later. I woke up and told her that flights weren't available, and I'd just gone to sleep in the hotel. After I hung up, I was treated to the vision of my wife swearing while trying to get Doug back over, but he'd gone home to his wife and said he couldn't get back out. Undeterred, she called our gardener and told him that she wasn't sure about meeting tomorrow. Thursday was his day to do our yard, and I guess, to do my wife as well, but he and JOSC were welcome to come over tonight. I shut down the website and stumbled out. I just made it to the liquor store in time to buy another bottle before closing. Luckily, I passed out again before drinking too much of that bottle. I didn't really want to unalive myself. The next morning, nursing the worst hangover I'd had since college, I downloaded several of the videos. I picked the ones I thought had the best action. I sent the appropriate ones to Doug's wife, the boy's parents, and hopefully my gardener's wife's Facebook page. If it wasn't her page, well, I hope whoever got it enjoyed it anyway. I then went to my wife's Facebook page and posted a video I'd strung together from the clips, changing her password on the way out. I thought her parents might enjoy the home movies as well, so I included an email for them. I packed and headed for the airport after setting up an appointment with a divorce lawyer for that afternoon. I ignored the repeated calls from my wife and from our families that day. I didn't care. Maybe it was the bourbon, maybe it was the disrespect that my wife had for me, or maybe it was just self-disgust, but I was numb and just didn't care. I tried not to wonder what was wrong with me that my wife offered everything to my neighbors, my brother, my gardeners, and even a random stranger, but for me, just missionary. And I still didn't know who would show up on Fridays. The weekends hopefully were reserved for the missionary work. Glenda. I'd always loved sex. Any kind of sex. At college, I was considered very open to experimenting. Do you know how hard it is in college today to be considered that way? My sorority sisters didn't know a position or hole they didn't like. But I was always proud to take it a step further. My nickname was Subway because of how many writers I could carry. Then I met Robert Carlson. Tall, blonde, Icelandic hunk of man, but tender and loving. I just graduated college and had my first job at the firm Bobby worked for. I saw him, and it was over. This was my man. We dated for 3 months before we got sexual. I was crawling the walls but didn't want to appear slutty, and Bobby was taking it slow, but oh, so thoughtful. Everything with Bobby was so romantic. Flowers, candies, an orchid for my wrist on our first date. He opened doors, pulled out my chair, everywhere and every day he treated me like a queen. But there always seems to be a but. Yes, he had a handsome bum, but that's not what I mean. He was Icelandic, and I suppose that explains it. He loved fish. And not just any fish, unless it was the most smelly, disgusting thing in the world. Now, I don't like fish. We didn't grow up with it in the Midwest, like they do here on the coast. Yes, there was lake fish and trout, but my mother was terrified of bones. She always told us the story of a childhood friend who choked to death on a fish bone. So, except for canned tuna, fish never touched our lips. Bobby, on the other hand, never snacked on chips or crackers. For him it was anchovies and sardines. That I could take to a point. Knowing that there are bones in them while he drops them in his mouth like a trained seal, is really hard for me to take. No, the real problem was his preference for dinners. Bluefish was hard to take, but surströmming makes me want to heave. Scratch that, it made me heave. The smell is atrocious. But then he likes foreign dishes, as if rotting herring was apple pie American. No, there's shiakara from Japan, and hikari from Iceland are so revolting I threw up on the table when he tried to get me to try shiakara. The waiter looked at the remains of my lunch on the table and said, "That's a novel approach to shiakara I hadn't seen before." He smiled down at me as he gathered the 4 corners of the tablecloth. But a wise choice. I'll bring you a shot of whiskey. I'm told it helps. It did. I later bought a bottle to keep on hand. The Danish hikari he has sent to him by a cousin in Iceland. It's some kind of fermented shark. He had invited me to dinner, thinking I'd try it, but when he opened the door, I started gagging and ran back to my car. That almost finished us. But I loved Bobby, and I was his queen. He agreed to keep his fish away from me, and I agreed to leave him forever if he didn't. I'd still catch whiffs of the fish dishes on him. I think he sweats the stuff, sometimes, but not enough to make me want to lose him. I thought we'd worked it out. Then we had sex. Like I said, I loved sex, any kind of sex. But my Icelandic god had some problems. First, when I gave him a BJ, the image in my head was that I was sucking on a not-breathing fish. Literally. A not-breathing, rotting fish. His stick tasted and smelled the fish. But I soldiered on, then wished I hadn't. He came in my mouth, big time. I guess he hadn't had sex or relieved himself in all the time we dated. He gushed. And suddenly I had a mouthful of slimy surströmming. Or lutefisk or hikari, I don't know. It was so ducking disgusting. I gagged and just made it into the bathroom before vomiting. You know, dating a guy who makes you vomit usually ends the relationship. But I love Bobby. I lied and told him oral was disgusting. The problem was, I really enjoyed oral, but not if it was going to end with a mouthful of revolting, decaying fish taste. I love Bobby. But it turned out he was not very good at sex, except for one position. Missionary. In any other position, he went at it with gusto, but it was like being poked repeatedly with a pool cue. Not a good feeling. Getting him to slow down or adjust his angle never seemed to make a difference. I was weeping by the time he got off. I never let him try annual. I didn't think my intestines could take it. I think I would have ended up in the hospital with a shredded colon. But my Icelandic god was a god with a missionary. Somehow, he just naturally went in at the right angle to stimulate my magic spot in my bean. He could make me finish like no one else ever has. God, I love that man. Bobby was willing to do anything for me, so when I told him everything else was disgusting or offensive or unsanitary, he would let it go. He was my missionary man. I loved him so much. When he asked me to marry him, I swore to forsake all others, but in my mind, I was forsaking all the sex acts that I enjoyed. I gave them up for Robert Carson. 3 years into our marriage, Bobby was working harder than ever, with longer and longer hours. He began traveling to other locations, leaving me alone sometimes for weeks at a time. He had his brother Doug come over and take me to dinner and to family events. As a result, we spent a lot of time together. One night, after celebrating the birthday of one of my sister-in-laws at Bobby's parents' house, I drank too much. Not sloppy drunk, just feeling good, like I did in college. Doug drove me home, and not wanting to be alone, I invited him in for a nightcap. 1 became 5, and neither of us was feeling any pain. We were sprawled on either end of the couch and started talking about life. It turned to sex, and in frustration I blurted out that I miss giving BJs. I wasn't so drunk that I wasn't instantly embarrassed, but when Doug wanted to know what I meant, I explained about the fish and the slimy cum it seemed to create. Doug nodded, as he sipped his whiskey. Yeah, Bob always goes for that shy. Don't know how he does it. I can't stand any of it. You don't eat that fish? I asked. Somewhere between his negative reply and my next conscious thought, I had his stick in my mouth. Did I mention that I love giving BJs? It was like coming home. And his cum, I don't know what Doug eats, but it tasted like ambrosia. It had to be the best tasting stuff I'd ever had. I was horrified to realize what I'd done. I love Bobby more than life, more than sex. I do love Bobby. But God, I love sex. I missed it so much. My affair with Doug broke the dam. That was just the beginning. Doug and I did it every chance we had, even after he met and married Megan. He became my Wednesday hump. Monday was Malcolm. He came to the door selling solar panels. He had a smooth sales pitch and I said, well, aren't you a silver-tongued devil? I'll bet you could do wonders with that tongue, couldn't you? I don't know exactly how it ended up, but he was happy to not make a sale. He comes back every week to try again. And again. I love Mondays. He really does have a magic tongue. I was having trouble moving some furniture in the house while Bobby was away. My neighbor Gloria sent over her sons, Daryl and Donnie. Twins. They were in college. I'd never had twins, but I did remember how much I enjoyed doing 2 at once. I gave them a master's course. Soon, they were going for a PhD. Plow me harder, dear. They scheduled their courses to be able to attend my classes on Tuesdays. Luis and Jose were there every Thursday, doing the yard. They were young, virile and just a little pot-bellied. They ducked me as soon as they got to my yard, and quite often again after they finished the yard work. I felt strange paying them. I mean, should they pay me for the sex, or should I pay them for more than just yard work? Fridays were my free day. I usually spent it alone, so I'd be as fresh as possible for Bobby on the weekend. But sometimes, there was a bag boy at the grocer's or the postman might ask if he could do a special delivery. God, I love sex. I sometimes can't believe I went for 3 years with just Bobby's missionary wonders, although they're still the best part of my week. He really hits the right spots, and I really love that man. Life couldn't be better. I had the man I loved, and all the sex a girl could dream of. Bobby. When I arrived at the airport, I took a cab to the lawyers. I wasn't ready to confront Glenda. I wanted my options. Ralph Thurston was the lawyer that had been recommended. He was in his 60s and liked to say he'd seen it all. Well, he said that until I showed him my videos. I told him my story. He almost jumped down my throat when I told him about sending the videos to everyone and posting it on Glenda's Facebook page. Do you know the trouble you've opened yourself up for? He paced around the room, agitated. Well, you can't get the emails back, but you've got to fix your wife's Facebook page. Maybe no one's seen it. He shoved me into his chair and had me go into Facebook on his computer. In the end, we deleted my wife's entire Facebook account. Ralph wasn't sure if that would erase any trail, but it seemed the safest course. Don't send out any more videos, don't try for any more revenge. Bobby, you're just going to get bit in the bum bite. You're already in a weak position. Don't make it worse. Ralph slumped back into his seat after I vacated his chair. He stared at me. I'll give you a list of things you do want to do. So, I spent a good part of the day at Banks and at my office, splitting our finances and removing her from any policies I could. I was stymied by our HR department. Apparently, you can't take a spouse off your 401k without them signing off on it. Well, that'll be in the court's hands. After the bank, I went to my sister Cheryl's house. Her kids were off at school, and I knew she would be free. She was shocked when I told her my story, and horrified when she learned that our brother was one of the men my wife cheated on me with. When I told her that Ralph had advised me to have a witness when confronting Glenda, she agreed to come with me. I probably wouldn't have even gone home, except I'd been living out of a suitcase that now smelled suspiciously like bourbon. I guess I am a sloppy drunk, in that I splashed the bourbon the night before over most of my stuff. When we pulled up in front of my house, Jose and Luis were trimming the lawn. I guessed that it wasn't his wife's Facebook I'd sent the video to. I picked up their rake and threw it at them. "Get the duck out of here," I yelled at them. "If I ever see you here again, I'll unalive you." They were in their truck and headed down the block before I finished my threat. I saw that I now owned some yard tools. They'd left them behind in their haste, and if they valued their lives, they wouldn't be back for them. Glenda was at the door, looking at me with red-rimmed eyes. I guess either she'd been on her Facebook page, or her parents had told her about the video I'd sent them. "Bobby," she said, "I'm so sorry. It doesn't mean anything." "Shut up, you hole," my sister shouted at her. I guess the neighbors were going to get a blast of drama on my front yard. His brother. You ducked our brother, and you don't think that means anything. Are you delusional, or have you taken so much stuff up your bum that your head fits up there now? Inappropriately, that struck me funny, and I sat down on my front steps, laughing. I was suddenly exhausted by the events of the last 2 days. My laughter morphed into a sob. I got myself under control. I didn't want to be seen weeping on my doorstep. My neighbor's wife looked over the fence, but ducked away when my sister saw her and started shouting, "And your 2 sons should be ashamed." My sister stopped when the woman disappeared. I guess she didn't see any point in continuing. I got up and went into the house to pack. Glenda followed me with Cheryl behind her. Glenda was wringing her hands, repeating, "Please, Bobby. Please, I love you." Cheryl whacked the back of her head, saying, "Shut up, slut." Glenda stood in our bedroom doorway, glumly watching me pack. I picked up our wedding photo off the dresser, looked at it, and then at Glenda. I smashed the photo on the corner of the dresser, letting the glass and broken frame fall to the floor. Glenda wailed in pain. I had my sister start filling another suitcase with the contents of my dresser drawers as I lugged the first 2 cases down to her car. My wife went to follow me, but I savagely snarled at her, "Stay the duck out of my way." She collapsed by the bedroom door while I headed downstairs. When I returned upstairs, Glenda was still on the floor. She looked at me pleadingly, repeating again that it meant nothing. "I just miss sex so much, Bobby." Something burst in me. She missed sex. She was the limiting factor to it all. I screamed and raised my fist, rushing towards her. I've never hit a woman. I don't know if I would have hit her, but it would have been a close call. But I found my arm caught by my sister, who then pulled me into a firm hug. "Don't, Bobby. She's not worth it. She's a hoe. Just leave her." Glenda wailed again. I felt like I had no love or pity left for her. "Be out of the house by next Tuesday. I'm telling the landlord that we're done. I'll move out my stuff this week. Move yours or I'll trash it, like I will our wedding photos." I took the rest of my clothes and luggage that we packed down to the car. Before we drove away, I knocked on my neighbor's door. She didn't answer, so I shouted out, "Did you like the video? I'm thinking of taking it down to the college and showing the dean." I could hear yelling come from the house as I got into the car and my sister pulled away. I slumped against the door, feeling even more exhausted. Cheryl looked over at me and asked a question that I couldn't yet answer. "What about Doug?" My parents didn't even attempt to excuse Glenda. My father's only comment was disgusting, while my mother's remarks were twofold. "But they're just boys." About Donnie and Daryl, and the gardeners. That's just, well, we won't be using them anymore. But about my brother Doug, who I viewed as the worst offender. "Well, Bobby, it was just one mistake. Anyone can make a mistake. He's your brother." "Exactly, Dad. I'm his brother. And she's my wife. And it wasn't a mistake or an accident. His stick didn't accidentally fall into her holes." I was yelling at my parents. "Honey, there's no need to be vulgar. You got to forgive. My mother was more offended by my language, seemingly, than my brother's betrayal and my wife's infidelity. If not now, when can I be vulgar, Mother? What could be worse than your brother ducking your wife?" My mother looked disgusted that I was once again being vulgar. And not just once, but regularly, like clockwork, for months. Before and after his wedding. So, there's his infidelity as well. If I shouldn't forgive my cheating wife, should Megan forgive her duck boy husband? My father had the decency to look abashed. "Now, Bobby," he began again, "he's your little brother. You've got to make some allowances." I didn't hear the rest. I was going out the door when I stopped, turned, and looking at my parents, said, "You're wrong. I don't have a brother. And the way things are going, I may soon not have any parents." I closed the door on their shocked faces. I had turned my phone off, and when I turned it back on to check for work messages, I saw that there were multiple messages from Glenda and one from my sister-in-law Megan. There was also one from Doug. I handled several from work, deleted all Glenda's unheard, and then listened to Megan's. "Bobby, it's me, Megan. I got your video. She started to sob. It hurt my heart. I now regretted sending the video to her. Why? Why did you send that to me? I was happy, Bobby. I was happy. I heard her quietly sobbing, then the message clicked off. Why, Bobby? Was a good question. I was hurting and wanted Doug to hurt. But I forgot to consider Megan. She didn't deserve this. Megan was from a farming family. Her parents had already passed away, and she and her 3 brothers had inherited the farm. Her siblings ran the farm, did all the work, but shared all profits equally with their sister, whom they adored. Megan was the youngest. She had a very pretty, sweet face, very wholesome looking. Standing only 5'1", when Doug first brought her home the jokes were about her being as white as she was tall. That wasn't really true, although she was a stocky little thing, not my type at all. Glenda was thin and willowy, and fit right in my arms in a bear hug. The few times I've hugged my sister-in-law, it reminded me of trying to lift a barrel. She was solid, but more like the trunk of an old oak tree than a willow. Still, she was the sweetest woman I've ever met. There wasn't a mean bone or a nasty word in the woman. The longer my family knew her, the more we all agreed she was an angel. Now, I'd hurt her. I know, it was Doug and Glenda, but I was the one who had thrown it in her face. I was ashamed of myself. I played Doug's message. You miserable duckweed. You just had to send that video to Megan and duck up my marriage. It's your own ducking fault. You can't duck properly, according to Megan, except missionary. She can't stand you sticking her any other way. And your milk makes her sick. She says it tastes like surströmming because you eat all that rotten fish. Your own wife can't stand you. She loves my milk, she say. I don't know what else she or he had to say. I didn't want to know. I deleted the message, the rest unheard. My phone rang. I saw it was Megan and answered immediately with an apology. No, Bobby. I'm sorry I went off on you. I know it's not your fault that you're hurting. Her voice dropped. I know it's Doug and Glenda who are responsible. I love them, Bobby. How could they do this to us? Do they love each other? Doesn't he love me anymore? Her sniffling came over the phone. I don't know about Doug, but it turns out that Glenda's just a hoe. I said, more vehemently than I had intended. Sweet Megan leapt immediately to defend her friend. She would never see the bad in anyone. Oh, no. They must love each other. I'm sure they couldn't help themselves. I began laughing. Seriously laughing. When I could, I responded that Glenda must love the world at large, based on the evidence. I told her about the videos I hadn't sent to her, the ones with the twins and the gardeners. I forgot to mention the random guy on Monday. I wondered how to find out who the heck he was. Megan was horrified, but Farm Girl Megan was more practical than the rest of us. Bobby, should we get tested for STDs? Who knows what she might have picked up? I was surprised that the thought hadn't occurred to me. I shivered at the thought of syphilis or gonorrhea, before the horrifying thought of incurable AIDS or even herpes infected my brain. God, you're right. I'm going to go down to the docks right now. Bobby, could you take me? I don't want to go alone. Her despair flowed through the phone. I told her I'd be right there. When I got to Doug's house, I briefly wondered where he was. I didn't want to run into him. Instead, coming out the front door were Megan's 3 brothers. Some people think we Icelanders are tall, but nothing beats the Swedes. As small as Megan was, her brothers were just as tall. I'm 6'2", and I felt like a kid next to these bruisers. And they were hard men, working 12-hour days laboring on a farm. I'd always gotten along with them, but the looks they were giving me made me wonder if I should stay in the car. But I got out, and other than asking where that a whole brother of mine was, they just passed me by carrying boxes to their truck. Megan met me at the door and explained that her brothers were moving her back to the farm. Where's Doug? I asked, although I really didn't want to know. I wasn't sure what I would do when I finally saw him. I hope never to see him or Glenda again. I don't know. When he came home, I was crying on the couch. When I asked him why, he shrugged. When I told him my brothers were going to unalive him, he packed a bag and left. I thought he might be at your parents'. I thought back to that morning. My parents had maneuvered me away from the kitchen now that I thought about it. That a hole was probably there. I would deal with it later. Megan saw me clench my jaw and scowl at the thought of my brother. She stood on tiptoes to pull me down into a powerful hug. Don't let this ruin your beautiful personality. Don't let others sour you. She kissed my cheek before releasing me. I was amazed that in her grief she still put thoughts of others first. I quietly led her out to the car and took her to the clinic for her tests. When I took her home, her brothers were finished loading the truck, waiting to take their sister home. I suggested that I take them to lunch, and Megan agreed. The brothers went along with her, but still looked at me with anger. At lunch, I told the story of Glenda's activities, and the brothers' anger turned to looks of pity. I realized at that moment that while Megan was a sympathetic figure as the betrayed wife, I was an object of scorn as the man who couldn't satisfy his wife. Worse, I was such a pitiful being that even my brother was doing my wife. Gunther, the oldest brother, asked what I was going to do about Doug. Same question my sister had asked. I told him that I didn't have a brother, but other than that, I don't know what I could do. When I said that, something in his eyes seemed to register that I was indeed a wimp. I tried to explain. Beating him up or hurting him financially would only alienate my family, although thinking back to the morning, maybe that shouldn't be a concern, or would damage Megan. Their bills, like most married couples, were in both their names. Hurting one would hurt the other. Likewise, trying to embarrass or discredit him with his infidelity would reflect on Megan and me. Especially me, I thought. I don't think I could take everyone looking at me like Megan's brothers were doing then. I want to smash his face into the ground. I want to crush his balls. I really want to hurt him, but I don't want to go to jail over a hoe. I don't want to lose the little I have left. What can I do? I sounded whiny even to myself. But I'd been going over this problem in my head since seeing the first videos. Other than temporary release, I saw no upside to revenge against any of the men my wife was cheating on me with. My lawyer had made it clear that I would only hurt myself disseminating the videos I'd made. And the only other thing I could do to Glenda was divorce her, but since she didn't work, I think that just meant I'd still be stuck supporting her sex life through alimony. I wanted to cut off her ears and her nose or ship her off to an Arabic house. I wanted not to feel so impotent. I realized, looking at Gunther, that I wanted my manhood back, but didn't know how to get it, without regret. Megan took my hand, and with the other hand turned my face towards her. You are a loving man. You are a strong man, who has always done what is right. I know that you want to hurt your wife and your brother, and those other men as well, but I also know that you are better than that. I know that you are strong enough to find yourself without lowering yourself to their level. She pulled me into another of her bear hugs. I wept in her hair, unashamedly. It was cathartic and strangely comforting to be held by her. Her brothers looked away, uncomfortable with my unmanly display. But you know, Megan was right. I wasn't going to ruin what was left of my life for people who were beneath my notice. Even with alimony, Glenda was going to have to find a job. God, she'd hate that. She'd never had to work before and hated being told what to do. Plus, while I couldn't post the videos anywhere, I'm sure I could share them with her co-workers at any job she got. Who knows, maybe that would give her the sex life she wanted. The others, the men. Duck 'em. I'd wish a horrible disease on them, but Megan and I would probably have gotten it too. So, duck 'em. I know people would want me to burn the witch and duck over the bastards, but it really wasn't worth it. I smiled at Megan, drying my eyes. You're right. I'm better than that. She smiled back at me as she and her brothers exited the restaurant. Gunther stopped and looked at me while I was signing the bill. I didn't think his look was one of approval. You might be better than that, he snarled at me, but we're not. He gave me an evil grin and left. Epilogue. Doug woke up, lying on the dirt floor of a barn. His body was bent with his face on his legs and his arms tied behind his legs. His bare bum, stick and balls were exposed and cold. He's awake, said Sven. Doug saw the three brothers standing above him, Gunther flanked by Eric and Sven. Gunther knelt down and slapped his brother-in-law's balls. Get the gelding knife, Sven, he commanded. No, no. God no, Doug began begging. You're lucky, Gunther assured him. We geld our own sheep and cattle, so we know what we're doing. You'll heal up nicely. But, he grinned evilly, we haven't decided yet whether or not to leave the stick. Doug started pleading and begging, crying and sobbing hysterically. Sven returned with the knife, and Gunther patted Doug on his head. It'll be over soon. Please no. I'll do anything, please. Doug was having trouble breathing. You hurt our sister. That we can't forgive. You must be punished. Eric knelt down on the other side of Doug. Between sobs and panting for breath, Doug couldn't articulate his pleas any longer. Sven squatted down by Gunther and said, you know, there may be another way. We could dip him. Yeah, maybe we could do that. Gunther agreed. Eric also nodded. It'll calm Doug enough for him to beg again. Please, yes, please. Don't geld me. Eric got up and came back with a paintbrush and a jar of liquid. What's that? Doug wanted to know what the brothers were up to. Sheep dip, Eric replied. I've added a few other ingredients, so it's a little caustic. He dipped the brush in the liquid and began brushing it on Doug's genitals, making sure to cover every spot. As he dipped the brush for a second application, Doug began screaming. Yes, said Gunther. You're likely to lose a few layers of skin. If it works like it does on our hands, it eats some skin and kills some nerves. You'll keep your balls, but not get much feeling down there. As Doug continued screaming, Gunther put his mouth by Doug's ear and said, "Listen, Aho. The pain will diminish in a few moments. We'll drop you off at the hospital in an hour or so. You can report us to the police if you like. We don't care. Just know that the feeling someday may return to your stick, but we have friends who will finish your castration if we're arrested. And they'll take it all. Your choice. We recommend at the hospital that you tell them you accidentally grabbed the sheep dip instead of your usual lubricant." The three brothers laughed. Doug screamed some more. Later at the hospital, the nurses thought the sheep dip story was as humorous as the brothers did. The brothers were in a good mood that evening at dinner. "Oh, Megan," Gunther ordered. "You making surströmming for dinner Saturday? I've invited Bobby to come to dinner." "Yeah," Megan's eyes sparkled. "He likes surströmming." Doug couldn't stand it. "Yeah, he likes it a lot." Gunther smiled. "He got really excited when I told him you like the taste better than anything else." Megan licked her lips at the thought of surströmming. Reach the end. Then you're my target audience for these stories, and the person I'm doing my video for. Please subscribe, like, and stay tuned for the next video.